I'm so glad to be speaking with you all this morning. The reason I'm up here is because there's this guy right here. He's not here with us today. He's in New York City, so that's all nice. So he gave me the privilege to speak today. So today we're going to be talking about Daniel 3 and how God is with us. Has there ever been a time in your past where you think that you're just going through the fires, going through trials, going through times that are just tough in your life? Well, today we're going to be talking about three men and how they went through literal fires and how they overcame it with God. So if you would open up to Daniel chapter 3. Daniel chapter 3. In verse 1, we meet this man named Nebuchadnezzar. That's a super long name. I don't know why his mother gave him that name. But Nebuchadnezzar made this golden image. And it was 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide. And it was set up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. So this is a very, very tall image that he set up. It translates to about 90 feet tall. If you think about Goliath, he's 9 feet tall. So that's like 10 Goliaths. So this is a huge thing. And it's also set up in the plain of Dura. This plain is going to be something that's very wide, very open. And this image is going to be clearly seen in it. It's going to be in the middle, out in the open, where every single person that's around in Babylonia can see it. So let me see. So it would have been easily accessible too. So it's going to be right there in the middle, plain and simple, just to worship it. So in verse 2, he summoned the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all other provincial officials to come to the dedication of the image he had set up. All these provincial officials assembled for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before it. So right now we have all these people, all these high-class people. This is trying to show that King Nebuchadnezzar is high class, and he's saying that I have authority over all these people, so why don't I bring out all the best of the best in my area to come out and worship this golden image that I've set up. And he's wanting everyone to see it. He's wanting everyone to know that I'm the king here, that I have authority and reign over this place. So in verse 4, the herald loudly proclaimed, nations and peoples of every language, this is what you are commanded to do. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all other kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace. Therefore, as soon as they heard the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, and all other kinds of music, all the nations and peoples of every language fell down and worshiped the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So we have all these people that are here worshiping this idol, and it's because that they're kind of forced to, in a way, if you think about it. I mean, worship this or I'm going to send you to death. You're going to be sent down to die. Did I already say it? So you're going to be sent down to die if you do not do this. You're going to be thrown into this blazing furnace. So it's going to be a very, very big death. And in this mindset, with everyone here, it's a mindset of worship this or die. Who isn't going to worship? Who isn't going to worship this image of gold? Because if I don't worship it, what am I going to do? I'm going to die. So the only thing that we can do here is to worship this idol. So all the nations and all the peoples worship this idol. This image. So in verse 8, At this time, some astrologers or Chaldeans came forward and denounced the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "May the king live forever. Your Majesty has issued a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all other kinds of music must fall down and worship the image of gold, and that whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, Your Majesty. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold that you have set up." So these people came here trying to denounce the Jews that are here, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and they see that they're not worshiping. They're not worshiping the image of gold that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So what's he going to do? He's going to try, these astrologers or Chaldeans are trying to denounce these Jews, trying to say, "Hey, these people aren't worshiping you, king. You need to do something about this." But these are not just three random Jewish men. If you would turn to Daniel 1, these are people that are set over the affairs of Babylon. But Daniel 1 gives us a little bit more insight into this. In verse 3 of Daniel chapter 1, "Then the king ordered Phinehas, chief of the court officials, to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility, young men without physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude of every kind of learning, well informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained 3 years, and after that they were to enter into the king's service. Among those who were chosen, some from Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The chief official gave them new names. To Daniel, the name Belteshazzar; to Hananiah, Shadrach; to Mishael, Meshach; and to Azariah, Abednego." So we see that these men are smart, they're handsome, they're from the royal families and nobles. These are not just nobodies. These are high-class people. These are some people that King Nebuchadnezzar would want to be around, who would want to serve, or want him to serve him. And the king ordered his chief officials to go to him and bring the men to him that were highly qualified to serve him. He only wanted the best to serve him. If we go back in verse 5, it said, "The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table, and they were to be trained 3 years, and then they would be able to enter in the king's service." So we move on to verse 8. "But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief officials for permission not to defile himself in this way. Now God had compassion to Daniel, but the official told Daniel, 'I am afraid of my lord and king, who has assigned your food and drink. Why should he see you looking worse than any of the other men your age? The king would then have my head because of you.' Daniel then said to the guard, whom the chief official had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, 'Please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance with the young men who eat the royal food, and treat your servants in accordance with what you see.' So he agreed to this and tested them." So we see that, We see that Daniel is saying, "Hey, we can do a lot better. We are better than anyone in your kingdom, and I know we can do it." So he says, let's not eat of this food and drink this wine that's from the king's palace. Let's do different. Let's eat vegetables and drink water so that we can show how much better we can be in just 10 days. Let's show how our appearance can just change in 10 days, and then show how much better that they are than the others. And show that they are worthy of his service, not to be added in the king's service in 3 years, but to be added in the service in 10 days. If we read on in verse 17, To these 4 young men, God gave knowledge and wisdom of all kinds of literature and learning. And Daniel can understand visions and dreams of all kinds. At the end of the time set by king to bring them into his service, the chief official presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and he found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered into the king's service, and every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all of the magicians and the enchanters of the kingdom. So the chief presented them into the service. The king entered them into their service. They didn't need 3 years. They needed 10 days. That's all they needed. And they were already 10 times better than all their magicians and enchanters there. These men were exceptional people. They were people with hard work ethics. They were people that had been helped by God. So you know they're going to be high quality men. But these 3 men that served under the king, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, are here. They're facing a difficult issue right now. They're on a plane where they're saying, do I worship this and not die, or do I live for God and die because I'm serving my God? So they're pressured into this. And everyone else is bowing down and worshiping this image. But what are they doing? They're not. They're not bowing down and worshiping. They're standing up and doing the opposite. And we read again in verse 12 that there are some Jews whom have been set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold that you have set up. So they rebelled against the idol worship. They paid no attention to the king and did not worship the image. The ones who served the king knew that they could die right now, but they would rather serve God than serve the king. They knew what the power scale was, and that God was up here, God was the highest, and the one that they should worship. They knew that the king was nothing compared to their God. So Nebuchadnezzar is mad. He's furious with rage, and he summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these 3 men were brought before the king. And Nebuchadnezzar said to them, is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold that I have set up? Now when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all other kinds of music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image that I've made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you'll be thrown down immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? So the king got mad. He was so mad that someone would actually go against him. But not only did some nobody go against him, it was the people that he trusted to serve him. The people that had proved themselves in only 10 days that they were worthy of serving him. And he's so furious that he tells them, is it true? Is it true that you would even defile me, that you would not serve the gods that I serve? Because that's blasphemy against me as the king. But maybe he thought it was a misunderstanding, so he gives them another chance. He says, when you hear the sound of all this music, I'll give you another chance to worship me, and that'll be good. But if you do not, then I will throw you into this furnace immediately. You will rather serve me and worship this God or worship this image, or you will be thrown down into the fire. So he finishes this by saying, what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? He's trying to say that there is no God that can rescue you from my hand. My hand is the only hand that could rescue you, because I'm the only one that matters. I'm the only person that you should be worrying about and serving. This God, any God that you think would be able to save you, cannot. And he thinks he has all this power, which he does not. Verse 16, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied, King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown in the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold that you have set up. Right here, they refuse to bow down. They refuse to bow down from it, and they say they don't even need to defend themselves because they know they feared God more than they feared the king. They knew that if they were to be thrown into the furnace, that God would be able to save them. They knew they had God. They knew God, if they were faithful to God, that God would save them. And it even says that even if God doesn't save them from this, it would be better that they worship God their whole life than to deny him right here and worship an idol. They would rather die worshiping God than to worship an idol for one day and live. So this brings them into the fire. In verse 19, then Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and his attitude toward them changed. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual, and commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. So these men, wearing robes, trousers, turbans, and all other other clothes, were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. Let me see. The king's command was so urgent, and the furnace was so hot that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, firmly tied up, fell into the blazing furnace. Nebuchadnezzar is even more furious, and he heats this thing even more hot because he is burning with rage. So this is kind of showing a little symbolism where his rage is going to be as hot as this fire that he's burning to punish Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And so he's making this even hotter. It's so hot that even some of his men, some of his strongest men, get burned by the flame and die from it. So this is a hot fire. This is a really big fire that is going to be blazing hot. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are even wearing flammable clothing. They're wearing clothes that are going to be burned. There's no doubt that they are going to be burned because they're just clothes that will be. So in verse 24, the king Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire? They said, certainly, Majesty. Look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound, unharmed, and the 4th man looks like a son of God's. God was with them in this fire, and none of them were being harmed. There's no harm to any of them. They trusted in God, and God provided them, and he saved them from the fire. Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here. So Nebuchadnezzar realizes that he was wrong to test God by saying, what God will deliver you from my hand? What God will rescue you from my hand? He did not think any God could do that, but he knows now that the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego is the God of them is the true Almighty God. And he calls them servants of God, which is a good name for them. So now we will see the deliverance of God. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire, and the satraps, prefects, governors, royal advisors crowded around them, and they saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair on their heads singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. So God delivered them from these fires, showing his power and to them and to Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar commanded them to come out of the fire. They walked out of the fire without a mark on them. It says that they were not harmed in their bodies. It says that nor was a hair on their head singed, and their robes were not scorched, and there was not even a smell of fire on them. If you think about what the smell of this would have been, it would have been a terrible smell. If you think about even having a smoke smell on you from a cookout or something like that, it's going to make a bad smell. Fire makes things smell very, very off. But this is showing another way of how God is powerful. He's so powerful that he can even do the smallest things, like make them unharmed and make their smell go away from this fire. It shows how much God saved them in this, from every little detail that he saved them. And they knew that they were going to come out because of God. So they trusted God. In verse 28, Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defiled the king's command and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve any god except for their own God." So they first trusted God, so they defiled the king's command, were willing to give up their own lives instead of worshiping the image that the king had set up. And they knew that they would rather serve God, even if they had to die for God, than to worship this image. So God rescued them because they didn't deny him. He rescued them. And in verse 29 to 30, "Therefore I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against Shadrach, Meshach, or the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, be cut into pieces, and their houses be turned into piles of rubber, for no other God can save in this way." And then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. So they were protected. The king protected God in Babylon, and he protected them and promoted them. So God has rescued them, and now they're able to live a life in a better way where God is seen. So let's get some application from this. If we trust in God, then God will rescue us from our sins. So how can we safely walk through these fires? First, we need to trust in God's power. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego trusted in God's faithfulness to deliver them. And this should remind us that God is with us through our trials and our temptations. And we should know that he is able to deliver us from these situations. In 1 Corinthians 10:13, Paul tells us that God will not allow us to be tempted beyond what we can bear. And James says that we should count all of our trials joy, since it builds up our faith in God. And he also says that if we're lacking in any way, that we should ask God. If we are lacking in any way and we're struggling through these trials, we need to ask God what we need, and he will provide for us. He will be there for us, and we can get through these trials with God. Next, we need to know that God is with us. God was with them in the fires, and he protected them from the harm that they would face. God is with us, and he will always be with us, especially in the midst of our trials. Isaiah writes in Isaiah 43:2, "When you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and when you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be set ablaze. The flames will not set you ablaze." And then Moses writes to Joshua in Deuteronomy 31:6, "Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified because of them. For your Lord, your God, goes with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you." And David wrote in Psalm 23:4, "Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me." It's not God's nature to leave us. He is omnipresent and unchangeable, and we know that he is always going to be with us. He's even incapable of leaving us. This should be a comfort to us, knowing that God is going to be here for us, and every time, every day, anywhere we go. And God even gives us reminders all through the Bible about how He is with us. He even named His Son Emmanuel, which means God is with us. And we can be comforted. We can be comforted by Jesus. We can be comforted by God, knowing that He is always going to be with us, that we have an all-powerful God that even wants to be with us. Last, we need to refuse to conform to the world. In Matthew 10:33, whoever denies me before men, I will also deny before my Father in heaven. They did not deny God before all these men. They stood up for God whenever it was in the hardest time of their life. They knew that it was not going to be a popular decision. They knew that they might die, but instead of bowing down for the idol, they trusted God. And we need to do the same. We need to trust God, and we need to be willing to put Him first in our lives instead of doing what the world might think is popular. So are you trusting in God today? Do you know that God is with you every second of the day? What are you doing to trust in God and to see see Him in your daily life? Are you trying to get to know your God? Or are you waiting for God to send you a sign? I think God already sent a sign, which was Jesus. Jesus was sent to die for us, and that should be our sign. That should be our sign that we should follow Him every day. What are we doing to serve our one and only God? Are we praying to Him every day so that we can talk to our God that is with us every day? Are we searching through the Scriptures to learn more about our God? Do you want to be with God every day? I think there's a way to be with God every day, and that's to follow God and to be saved. We need to first believe in God, believe that Jesus came to the earth to die for our sins, and that He was buried and resurrected on the third day. And we need to turn from our sins, being baptized into water for a new life, living a new life. And then one day we might live a new life in heaven. We need to serve God the rest of our lives as Christians. If there's anyone here going through the fires today, know that God is with you. If you need prayers from the church or anything from us, would you walk up front and we will talk with you and remorse with you. Maybe you're not wanting it to be known. Maybe we can talk to you in private, in a call, text, email. Just let us know any need that you have as we stand and as we sing.